Welcome everyone. Today we are going to be painting the quail. It's going to be quite exciting. Before we start, take a deep breath and let go. Studies show that the students who get the very most out of these classes, or even out of painting in general, and learn the most are the ones that can just take the pressure off. Don't worry about the outcome being perfect. Enjoy the journey, enjoy the process, enjoy learning the different techniques, and have fun. I know, it's crazy, but having fun actually makes you learn way faster and absorb way more. So I want to invite you to do that as we paint today and as you're walking along this course. So we're going to get started. Before you start with watercolor, you want to look at it and you want to go, okay, what needs to be drawn and what's the order that we're going to be doing it in. So of course, first we need to draw it. So I'm going to be walking you through drawing it. After that, we're going to be painting the background because that's the furthest back and you always want to start with the furthest back. Then we're probably going to paint like the brown to blue area, then the belly area, then we'll probably do the face and the feet. Then we'll do the other part of the face and the feet and this little thingy and the piece of wood. Then we'll do the details at the end. So let's get started with the drawing. So when you're looking at it, especially after just looking at the other drawing course that I just posted, you want to think about what shapes are in here. And you want to think about what size and where. Like, it doesn't have to be exactly this. You can change all the proportions, make it bigger, make it smaller, put it in different places, change the orientation. There's so many different options. I'm going to draw it similar to this so it's easier when we're following along. So when I look at this, I like to start with the head, and I'm just going to move that over a little bit. And I see an oval, and then I see another oval here. Then I see kind of a big oval here. See how I'm doing that? I'm looking at this space, and this space. Then for the wing, I could go, okay, there's an oval here, maybe a little triangle there. And maybe I'll even put a little bit of a beak in, so it's kind of rounded on the top and straighter on the bottom. Now I'm going to start, I'm not even going to do the little tuft. I don't know what that thing is called. If you know, let me know. But I'm going to draw that after. I'm going to start with, so I've got just some basic shapes in. I actually might add a really basic foot in too. Like we talked about in drawing, the faster and the rougher you can be at the beginning, the better. Because as it develops, you'll be able to see the shapes. Then I'm going to check my angles. So I've got my shapes down, and I like to start kind of somewhere in the head, and I'm going to go about here and looking even what is that gap. And then I'm bringing that around. It's kind of like this, and then it comes down, and then it comes out quite dramatically here, and then down again. And then over here, we've got the beak, and then it angles in and then comes out. And then this line comes out just a little bit. So we're going to bring it just out just ever so little bit. And then looking at that wing, and even looking at the gap between the wing and the side, it kind of goes in, out, and I'm still just using my angles so that I can kind of get the proportions and my estimate. Mine looks a bit wider here, so I'm going to bring that in a little bit more. Then I'm going to angle in these little white areas. Then I'm going to bring this area angled in, and another little line here. Then a line through the middle, and an eye. Now that the eye is in, to me the beak looks too big. So I'm just going to make the beak a little bit smaller. It's got that little curve on it too. And making it come in here. Then now is the point that I'll add this little thing. And it's really nice if you can look at the negative space. So I'm coming over here and I'm looking at this gap and I'm almost trying to draw that right now. And then I'm bringing the other area up. Now let's see the feet, and the probably would help if we drew the stump. Then bringing it over here, using my angles again, and my angles over here. Now it's coming together. It's looking there. I'm going to take my gray eraser, and I'm just going to lighten it. So it works really good with the gray kneaded eraser if you just kind of press up and down. What this is doing is it's lightening it so that I can put another layer on top. Now I'm going to turn them both upside down and go around my angles and my edges again. Now that it's upside down, this area looks a lot different. I think this line's too long, so I'm going to make that line a bit shorter. And then bring this down, and I'm checking that edge. Going around the edges, even checking my negative space, like between the legs and the width. And this last time that I'm going around, I'm pressing a little bit harder so I can see my new lines. Even in here, seems a little bit narrower. There's almost some layers in there. And it's quite narrow at the bottom of the wing. And then bringing it around again. The top part of the face looks a bit funny too. Let's see, we got the line. Maybe the eye needs to be further back. Or maybe this needs to be forward. Sometimes it's just playing around with things, like, oh, how does this look? How does that look? And if something looks a little bit off, like, trust your eye every time and just keep playing around with it, keep rearranging. The thing with animals is no matter how good you paint it, if your proportions are off with the drawing, the painting will always look off. So it's worth putting the extra time in when you're doing an animal for the drawing. Something else, you can trace it too. Like there's no shame in that, because we're doing this for fun. We're not doing this because we're forced to, or it's our job. It's a fun recreational activity. And if drawing it is really stressful and it's not something you want to practice as much, you just want to do the painting, then I say it's okay. If people ask and we've traced it, then I tell them, like, no, I didn't paint it, I traced it. Or I didn't draw it, I traced it. But yeah, I definitely encourage that too. It's like tracing it. In class, we've done a lot of paintings that, yeah, we've had it a lot of times where we do an animal, and then if you don't put enough time into it, it will always be disappointing because it will look off. This white area at the top, it's close to the eye. It's fun because when it's upside down, the pressure's off. It's like you don't have to have it perfect. You just draw what you see. And then we'll turn it right up again. Well, yeah, I like how that turned out. I think it's looking good. It's cleaned up. So now what I recommend is pause the video and draw your quail. Welcome back. So it's a good idea to always clean up your lines after you draw. So make sure everything's really clean and you have a very distinct, like, this is where the line is and this is where the line isn't. So I'm just taking some of the extra lines off and making sure I have a well-defined area of, okay, this is the wing, this is the belly, and I haven't got a lot of extra lines places. You use a lot of extra lines when you draw it, but then when you're ready to paint it, you want it to be really clean and smooth so that you know directly where your different areas are. So now it's gonna be time for mixing our paint. So I recommend using your yellow brush. This is like a bush brush. And when you look at this, there isn't any white anywhere in the background. So if there's no white, that usually means that there's two colors. There's this color and there's this color. So this color, you can see it's just a very, very light version, but you're going to need a lot of it. I would say like at least a full pod because it covers most of the page. But then this area, the darkest area that you see, is probably only about a quarter of the page. And this is quite a dark color. So I would use the scooping method for that one. So we're going to start with the light one. Take your yellow brush and fill your pod all the way to the top. And then you can do any colors you want. I'm going to do some similar colors to these just so it's easier when you're watching it. When you look at that, I see it as green, gray, and maybe brown. So I'm going to start, the most prominent color, like the closest color on the color wheel, I would say is gray. So then there's two ways of mixing gray. You can mix gray if you want a more complicated way that is better for you for learning color mixing. You can do an equal mix of blue, yellow, and red. It's actually a little bit more blue. Because if you had an equal mix, then you make brown, but then if you had a little bit more blue, it makes gray. So that is something you can play around with. For speed's sake, I'm just going to put some black in it. And then, to me, it's gray-green. So then I'm going to add some green to it. Then I'm taking my brush off on the side, testing it, and holding it up to that color. It's pretty similar. If anything, maybe a little bit of brown with it because it looks greener than those colors. And maybe a little bit more green. And let's try that now. Yeah, I like that. Then for the scooping method, taking my yellow brush, dipping it in the water. This is like gray-green. I'm going to actually start with green rather than black because black is such a powerful color and contaminates it so fast. So I'm going in here, scooping it off on the side, mixing it, putting my whole brush in, taking it off the side. I'm almost doing little circles or a little back and forth motion. Then I'm going with the black. Every time you add black, especially when you're adding it full potency like that, you want to just add it very slowly because black overpowers your colors very quickly. And then I'm going over here. And it could be that I'm like, oh, I actually really like the brighter green way better. But if you're wanting to get it the same color, then you want to add more black, probably a little bit more brown, a little bit of brown. So I'm going in there, adding black. And you see how when I tested on my sample piece, I put it on both sides. If you have it on both sides, you can hold it up to your painting easier. See, that's closer. In fact, that's probably even borderline darker. But you know, I think that's pretty good. It's better to be borderline a little bit too dark than borderline a little bit too light because you can lighten it on your painting. If you want to take this to another level or make a more advanced testing, you can put your two colors beside each other on your sample piece and just kind of mix and blend them. So you're like, okay, this is what my background would look like right now. And are you pleased with that? And I'm like, yeah, I really like that. So now I'm going to take my big brush, clean it off, dry it off. And I've got an extra piece of pencil there. And I'm starting with my lightest color. Ooh. So I'm going to start with my big brush. If you're finding your big brush for this area too cumbersome, switch to your medium brush. We're going to start with going around our quail. And when you're going around something that you want to keep wet and you want to keep the background behind it wet with it, it's really important to have it puddly, not just flat. Flat would be like this. This is puddly. Do you see the difference? Flat will dry in like 20-30 seconds, where puddly will stay wet for even a couple minutes, giving you time. As you can see, I'm not making it absolutely perfect on the edges of this quail. I'm just doing kind of near the edges because the quail is darker than the background. So when you're doing a subject matter in front that's darker, you don't have to be as careful if it gets in, because you know it'll be covered. If your subject matter in the front is lighter, that's when you want to be really careful. So I'm going around the edges, dipping back in my brush every like 2 or 3 seconds so that I can get it really puddly. Then when I run out of this color, which you might, like I am, then I'm going to just grab some water, because I want most of this to be wet. And you can see here it's lightest right near the quail. And now that I'm putting my color on, I'm realizing, whoa, my light color is darker than this light color. And so again, you can evaluate, do you like it like that, or do you want it like this? There is a way to lighten it on here by just adding more water right near the quail, and that will pull the color back later. I might do that maybe just to one side. So I might have it just lighter on the one side to give it even more dynamic. You can do it to both sides, but that's the glory with watercolor, is you can lighten it easily on the painting. It's much harder to darken it, because you got to just mix the color and have the color directly, like the same shade. Anyways, now it's all wet. I'm going to take it and I'm going to tilt it, because with watercolor, to have it all even, you want to have like no puddles and no areas that are partly dry and partly wet. So I'm tilting it. You want to be very careful that it doesn't tilt through the quail. So I'm turning it both directions, and the extra puddles I'm just pulling off with my brush and putting it back down and drying my brush off. Then I'm going in with my dark color, and if it's warping like this, you see how it's kind of bowing a bit, you can take your brush and put it down in the middle. Some people just use their finger and they press down. The tough thing with touching your fingers to the painting is sometimes it can leave a tiny bit of oil or a tiny bit of like surface that will repel the paint. So I usually try not to touch it with my fingers. I try to touch it with something else, but there's times where you just touch it and you risk it. So then I'm taking my dark color and I'm doing little circles around the edges where I want it dark. Then I'm going to clean my brush off, dry it off, and I'm homing in to the line. So my brush is mostly on the wet, mostly on the light color, and then I go in and barely touch the dark and come out, barely touch the dark and come out, barely touch the dark and come out. And I'm going along that edge and pressing really, really light on my brush. That's why I'm holding it kind of at the back, because you can hold it lighter and easier from back there. If you mix it too much and you lost your light in there, clean your brush off, dry it off, and you can pull the area back. If you're finding that it's starting to dry, like there, I don't know if you could tell, but I can kind of see my brush strokes. If you can see your brush strokes, that usually means it's getting quite dry. So you can use your squirt bottle. I'm holding my squirt bottle like 2 feet away and just misting the very, very edges of it. And you'll never want your squirt bottle right above your painting, because a drop can come down, so holding it far back. Then now it's misted a little bit more. I don't know if you can see it, but there's a little bit of puddle right along that top edge. So I'm drying my brush off and just pulling that off a little bit. Now you can see here, there's little white dots. So if you like that, you can take your bush brush or your medium brush. I find my bush brush works a little bit better. Loading it in the water, banging on my finger on the side until the dots are tiny. If I can see them tiny, then I'm putting it on here tiny. Even after the dots, I'm realizing, this area for some reason is just popping out at me. And it's not like it's just popping out as a line. So I'm taking a dry brush, and it's still high gloss, it's still shiny, so I've still got time. And I'm just ever so lightly pressing super light and just blending that area in a little bit. Welcome back. So I just blow dried this guy. If you're finding it's warping, you can just kind of go like this. I usually take 2 ends and I just back and forth with it, and that'll help straighten it out. Make sure your hands are really dry when you're doing this, because you can smudge it. And you know it's dry if it feels warm, feels cool or clammy, then it's not quite dry yet. Then after I blow dry, I like to just scrub it a tiny bit. So I'm just taking the edges and scrubbing anywhere where my background went into my bird. And as you can see, I'm not being exact. The main thing I'm smudging is that line between the two colors. If that line is smooth, then you won't see it. So I'm going along the line between the white and the green and just kind of touching that a little bit, smoothing out these edges. And the back of my tail got smudged a little bit. Then you can mix your colors. We'll mix our colors for the back area of the bird. So as you can see, there's a lot of colors going on here. There's a brown, there's a black, there's a blue. There might even be two blues. You can do one or two blues. So I'm going to start from here and work my way down. So I'm going to, as you can see, there's brown here and there's brown here. And like maybe a quarter of a pod, like a quarter of the painting that it's covering. So I'm going to take 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 scoops. Dip my brush in the water, dip it in the brown, mix it, transfer it, mix it, transfer it back and forth. See that this feels like more than a quarter, this feels almost a half, so I'm just going to take a little bit of it out and put it there. Because this is a dark brown, it'll take a really long time to mix, and if I have too much water, then it will take even longer. So I keep going back and forth with my brown. Almost ready to test it. This brown looks like it's got a tiny bit of black in it, so I'm going to take just a tiny hair of black, adding it super slow because black is a very powerful color. Overpowers the other colors very quickly. Then I'm going to take my sample piece, test it on here, hold it up. As you can see, it's not dark enough yet, paint-wise and black-wise. So I'm going to even take a little bit more of this brown out so it's easier to get it dark enough. I'm going to go in here. You could do the scooping method as well. Like this brown could have been both. It could be the scooping or the water method. When it's a dark color, sometimes it's easier just to do the scooping method, and then if it's too dark, you can add water. And adding a bit more black, taking it off on the side. Testing it, that's getting closer. Even that one still does have more black in it. So I'm putting more black in this color. Yeah, I like that. Then it's got black right here, and then it's got this bluey gray. So I'm going to dip my brush in the water, dip it in the black, mix it. So I'm going to do the scooping method and transfer it, dip it in the water, dip it in the black, mix it. Whenever you're doing the scooping method, it's good to mix it for a good 15-20 seconds. That way you've got it like dark enough. Testing it. There was water on my sample piece. So let's try this again. Yep, I like that. Then the blue, again, I would say max a quarter of a pod. So I'm going to do 1, 2, because it's like max a quarter of the page that it's covering. 3, I'm just going to start with 3 this time. Then I'm going to dip my brush in the blue, mix it. And I'm doing tiny little circles, transferring it. Careful. I would actually recommend, see, I'm splattering a little bit of it. Make sure your painting's far away when you're mixing, because that tends to happen. And then I'm adding a tiny bit of black, just hairs of black at a time. This black can be very overpowering very quickly. Ooh, see, I really like this color. I like it being brighter, so I think I'm going to leave this color. This one is more gray, so if I wanted this exact color, I would add even more gray. And to make this a more accurate testing, I'm going to put a little bit of the brown on top of this blue because you can see little bits of the brown and even a tiny bit of the black in there to equal like this area down here. Even the black and the brown will be in there. And then hold that up, hold this up to your colors and go, do I like these colors with what I have in the background? And even hold it next to here and go, do these colors go together or do they rub the wrong way? And I'm like, no, I like these colors. So now I've got my colors mixed. Now I'm going to paint this area of the bird. Now, if you look closely, there's tiny little bits of white. And for those tiny bits of white to be left, that means it needs to be either painted on dry or the water needs to be put on wet. Like the water needs to be put on with little chunks of white left and then put it on dry. You can do either or. If you want more time or if you're closer to beginner, my recommendation would be get this whole thing wet and then paint it from top to bottom. Because this is a more advanced demo, I'm going to do it the more advanced way, but showing you just two different ways to do it. The more advanced way is less time to do it, so you got to go a bit faster. I'm going to start with my brown, and you never have to keep it all upright. I very much encourage turning it so that you can get it at the angle. And when you're putting it on dry, especially like we are, you want your paint to be a little bit thicker. The reason for that is you want a little bit more time before it dries. And so I'm going around the edge and then cleaning my brush off, drying it off, and then it's lighter brown near the top. So I'm just putting a tiny bit of water near the top. And I could even make, if I want to make it even more advanced, kind of, I'm just touching these edges, so it's almost a little fluffy. And I could take a tiny, like I'm just barely touching the black, testing it here, tiniest bit of black, and putting it on that edge. And then I'm coming down, and there's black in here, and the black comes down a little bit. And actually it comes down this part a little bit too. Then cleaning my brush off, drying it off, going in with my blue, and I'm touching the edges of it, but I don't necessarily want all the blue to mix with all the black. I'm just kind of touching it, and they will bleed together a bit, and that's fine, that's what we want, but just not fully bleeding together. And as I put the blue on, you can see here, there's little bits of white, so I'm putting the blue on in little tiny dabs. And all of the strokes are coming in a motion, never going this way. You're looking at what is the pattern of the feathers, where is it going? In here it's all going in this like up and down kind of motion, almost curved, so that when your brush strokes are all in that motion, then it's your white spots are all in those motions. And because we're putting it on dry, you want to have your whole blue on really quickly so that you can put your brown and your black on. So I'm looking at this, and as I'm painting it, I'm watching, okay, how shiny is it? How much time do I have? Is there any area that's becoming unshiny? Put some more paint on that area. And whenever you're leaving white bits, I always recommend leave way more white than you think you want, because a lot of it will get covered in especially as you put different shades on. So I'm like, okay, that's good for now. And then I'm going to take my brown, and there's brown coming up this edge. So I'm going to bring brown up from the side. And it's putting a bit of the shadow and shade in there. And I'm starting at the bottom and pulling it up. This is where some of the white spots will leave, and that's fine. There's this little edge of the wing that's on the back area, and there's a hard edge. That means it'll have to be done when this is dry, making that part darker. There's little dots in here. Again, looking at the little dots, are they smooth edges or are they crisp hard edges? If they're crisp hard edges, then they're done when it's dried. And then I'm going to take a little bit of black. As I load the black, I'm taking it off on the side. This is a medium or even almost a dry load. Like I'm loading it, taking it off the side, testing it here, whenever you're adding black, just adding it slow and just tiny, tiny little bits at a time. And going in here, this part isn't black enough, so I'm gonna make it more black and bring a couple little dots out. It's called diffusing. So you're going like this. This is your black area. You don't want a straight line there, so you're doing lots of dots near the line and then less and less dots as it comes out of the line. So it's almost like looking like it's blended without actually any blending. It's just how you put the brush strokes on. So that's kind of the motion that I'm using here. And bringing some of these guys down. Then I could clean my brush off, dry it off, looking at where's the lightest area. The lightest area is right here. So I could pull some of that lightest area off. And all my strokes are going in that same direction. I don't want any strokes going in this direction because I want to pop out those feathers and pop out that motion. Maybe even a little bit here, pulling. You're putting your highlights in and your lowlights in. So I could pull a little bit of lights in here. Then I'm blurring my eyes and I'm looking at it and going, is there too much white happening here? Or is it okay? Like, is it pleasing to my eye? I might actually go back in with some of the blue. And I mixed way too much blue. You only need like half of that. So I would say like do 2 scoops. And I'm just covering some of these little white bits. The nice thing with feathers and textures, as it dries, like once you get your main colors on, you can just keep playing with it as it dries and it'll keep popping out more texture. And it's good to actually have some of the area more defined as it's drying, if that makes sense. Once you put all your colors on and like everything's where I want it, now I'm just kind of playing with it. Something else I'm noticing too, looking over here, it's smooth in this area, but then it's really rough and there's a lot of, like it's a texture change from here to here, and mine's kind of all the same texture. So if I want it more like this little tiny stipple area, it'll actually be a little bit easier when it's drier, but it's starting to get drier now. I'm putting just tiny little dots in that area where it's that different texture. Just see how that is popping out this area a little bit more? So now you can blow dry it. Oh wait, maybe we'll bring this guy a little bit further there. I know I had blue in my brush that I was going into the brown, but there's something about even having a little bit of blue or a little bit of your colors overlapping into other colors. So you're doing the brown, black to blue, and you can leave little white areas and you can bring some brown and black up. So now you can blow dry it. Welcome back. So I got this area blow dried. Next I'm going to do the belly, and this guy, I'll probably actually do this right now too in this demo. At any point if it's too much information, just pause it and you can paint and then unpause it and keep going. So I'm going to put the brown on, and we're putting it on dry. So that means that you want to put more paint on faster. So I'm starting with going around the edges, and as I go around the edges, I'm making it borderline puddly. That way it won't dry so fast. And then I've got a bit more time to play with it and work with it. I went a little bit over my wing there, and that's fine. It's a darker color that we're using, so it can cover it. Then as I paint it in, you can see there's little white bits that we're going to be adding after, but some of those little white bits you can put in right now. And I'm putting it in this direction, kind of a more back and forth direction, so that any white bits are in that back and forth motion. And then at the top, we're diffusing it like we did up here. So we're putting just like lots of dots near the top and then littler and littler dots. So it just kind of naturally goes in. Checking your edges. Then you can take a tiny bit of black and you can put the tiniest little bit of black underneath the wing for like a bit of shadow there. And yeah, you can bring a little bit on the bottom as well. A lot of times there'll be shadow on the bottom. I went a little bit over the edge there. So I'm just going to take black and I'm going to make it bigger. When you're working with dark colors, that's the easiest. You can dab with a Kleenex and try to pull it back. That usually creates a huge mess. So my recommendation. Sometimes you make it bigger twice, and that's fine. You'll get a little fatter. You'll be fine, little bird. You can clean your brush off, dry it off to see how there's a little bit of light there. So we put our darks in. You can also put a little bit of highlights in. So I'm just dabbing it back to make some of the areas just a little bit brighter. Then I'm going up here and I'm going to put the bottom of this guy in. So I'm going around the edges. And then filling it in. And then, if you get a bit into the white, just try to make it a smooth line. And then cleaning your brush off, drying it off, and pulling a little bit from the middle. Then I'm going to do the same thing with the little feathery thing at the top. And this is a good time to turn your painting so you get it at a good angle. I'm not going to turn it because it's easier for you to see when it's right side up, but I recommend that you turn it because it's easier to paint when it's turned. And as I fill it in, I'm filling it in little lines so that if there is any white areas, that they're kind of going in this motion along the edge. And then I'm going to blow dry it. So belly area, this tuft, and this tuft. All right, so this area is blow dried. Next area we're going to do is this part of the face and the feet. So as you can see, it's gray there. So I'm going to take a drop of water and just take a tiny, tiny bit of black and put it in there. And test it on my sample piece to see, okay, even maybe a little bit more. I put some blue in the gray. The blue and the black look a lot alike. And you know what? It might be fine. Yeah, you know what? I like it. So you could do that if you want to. When you're working with grays, you can have a lot of different colors in there, and it's fine. So for this area, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in this motion, back and forth along the top. And so it's almost like creating a bit of a feathery look. And it's darkest at the top and the bottom of this area, and even around the eye. It's a little bit dark in there. So I've got it in, but you see how this is all smooth and this is not. So I'm going to clean my brush off, dry it off, and just touch the very, very edges of where that color meets the white. I could even, it's a little bit wet right there, so I'm actually going to take my Kleenex and just ever so lightly dab it, because if it's too wet and you try and add another color, they'll just blend together. And I'm just going to take a tiny, tiny bit of black, put in a tiny bit of black near this top edge. Maybe redefine that white a little bit more. Cleaning my brush off, drying it off, and just blending the very, very edge. It's getting too puddly again, so I'm just taking my Kleenex, dabbing it off. Then I'm going to go in with my feet. I'm going to grab my brown, and my motion for the feet, I'm just filling it in dry. It's going around the edges. Filling it in. Then pulling any highlights and lowlights off. So cleaning my brush off, drying it off. I'm noticing, I don't know if you can see it from the camera angle, but it's kind of puddly. So when it's puddly and you've got a small area, it's harder to maneuver. So I'm pulling some of those puddles off. I'm also putting my highlights in. So it's maybe a little bit lighter right there. And then my lowlights, I'm going to take a tiny bit of black and I'm going to put it just along the base here. Then I'm going to do the next one. Clean my brush off, dried it off, going around the edges. Filling it in. This is another part that I recommend turning it, because whenever you're doing anything fine detail, it's really hard when you're doing it straight up and down. Then I'm taking a little bit of black, loaded it really light, and putting a bit of black in here. Then I'm going to go and do the beak. So I'm going to take my gray. Well, first I'm going to see, is that area dry? It's kind of nice when you're doing one piece and then another piece, and then if it's dry, you can just paint the piece beside it, which it is dry, so I can just go for it. So making sure that background area is blended in. Putting my gray in. I'm actually leaving a tiny, tiny bit of white between the beak, like the top beak and the top and the bottom beak. That helps differentiate them a bit. Then I'm taking, see, got a little puddly there. Then I'm taking a tiny bit of black, loading my brush, taking it off on the side a whole bunch, and then putting the black on the top and putting black on the bottom. And maybe bringing that little lip of the beak over a bit. Cleaning my brush off, drying it off, kind of maybe pulling a bit out of the center because you can see it's light right there. And for now, I think that's good. And because this gray area is dry, I can do the eye right now too. The eye is the best part. When you do the eye, it's like, oh, it comes alive. So I'm turning it. I'm very carefully going around the edges. And if you can, leave a tiniest bit of white, especially between the eye and the black, so that they don't just leak together. And then I'm going around where the highlight is. Then I'm very carefully filling it in. If you want to, you can pause and do some of those areas. I'm going to do the log next. So for the log, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my brown. It's got some light brown and some dark brown in there. So I'm actually going to put a bit of water on the log first. There's a couple different ways to do the log. I'm going to show you this technique. I'm going to put some water on it. And if I want, I can leave a little, like it doesn't have to be really puddly, it can be semi-dry, leaving tiniest bits of white between it, because that can pop up the texture. Then I'm putting the brown, it's darkest at the top, so I'm putting the brown along the top of the log. And then pulling it down. You don't want to see this original line. So I'm pulling it down so that you can't see that line. And then I'm almost drying my brush off and doing a little bit of dry brush through it. Then I might take a tiny bit of black, take it off my brush, and put a tiny bit of black. You want to make sure your feet are dry when you're doing this log, otherwise they'll leak together. Putting a tiny bit of black right along the top, and then pulling it down. Drying my brush off, just taking the very edges of that color and pulling it in. And I can bring a little bit of the dark through it. You can see some of the lines through there. And you can see here too, the dark is along the side, so it pops out better from the background. And sometimes it'll just be even the shadow of the log. And bringing just ever so slightly, holding my brush straight up and down, and adding some little definition in there. So now we're almost finished. I would give that a quick blow dry, and then we'll do finishing details. All right, so we're going to do some finishing details. I'm finding the face on mine isn't popping out very well. and then we're going to put some extra white on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a little bit of black, and I'm going to add a bit more black in here. So I pop out this white a little bit more, the top and the bottom. And there's a bit actually of the background left in here. So we're just going to go maybe around this area with a little bit of black. And a little bit around the beak. Do you see how I'm just going around the edges of the beak and touching it? And my eye is a bit narrower, or like not as far back. I've got it. This one's got a smaller gap. Mine's got a bigger gap there, and that's fine. I might even make my eye a tiny bit bigger. So I'm going to go in there and make my eye just a little bit bigger. You can even, like if this is your eye, you can do a little line like that. Sometimes that helps. So I might try that and see how it looks. Just trying to pop out the eye more. The eye is the character. The eye is what makes him come alive. Cleaning my brush off, drying it off. This area is still darker, so I'm going to bring this area just a little bit darker. Cleaning it off, drying it off, blending that in more. If this feels too complicated, you can just skip this part, or you can rewind it and watch it again to kind of see some of the little details I'm doing just to pop out that face a little bit more. The beak also, to me, like it's similar to this beak, but it doesn't look different from the body. So I'm going to take a little bit more dark and make the beak even darker than the picture that I'm looking at, because I don't want it to look like just the same texture as the rest of the body. I want it to go, no, this is separate. This is the beak area. Cleaning my brush off, drying it off, and just blending the edge of that. Now the white line in the middle is a bit too big. So let's make that a little bit narrower. There. I like that better. This part of the foot needs to be done. Now you can see that there is white. Kind of here more so, and like there's some extra white areas. Now there's two ways you can do that. One, you can put masking fluid on at the beginning and then peel it off at this point. What we did is we just left it, and we're going to be using this syringe filled with half acrylic, I would say like 3/4 acrylic, 1/3 or 1/4 water, and you can get it at Opus, and it's a really nice way to add extra details. So I'm taking the lid off, I'm testing it out on the side, and it can pop out, make sure that it's coming out, it can pop out some extra details. You see how I'm putting some little dots in there and some little squiggles. I'll put some little lines in here. They're all going in that same direction. And some little dots. I could even put a tiniest bit of white. It's not coming out, just test it on the side. Don't press harder on your painting because then it'll explode and put a big mark of acrylic. I'm putting a little bit more in there. Some little areas of lines of definition. See how it just pops a little bit more? Something else, this has more of a wiggly edge and mine has a very straight edge. I kind of like the wiggly edge better. It looks more fluffy and feathery. So I'm just going to take my white along that edge and just make it a little bit fluffy. Maybe even bring it a little bit higher here. And I've lost some of the white here, so I'm going to make that area a little bit thicker. Maybe make that area a little bit fluffy. Touching these edges a little bit more. Yeah, I like that. You can even like add some little definitions in here. If you lose your highlight, this is also a good time. You can put a little bit of a highlight in. You can put a little bit on the beak. You can also put a little bit on your log to just pop it out just a little bit more. You could also just use acrylic paint at this point with a fine brush, but I would water down the acrylic so that it's thinner, but it's some different things that you can play around with. At this point, you're ready for your signature. I'm like, oh wait, one more thing. Forgot about the dots. So there are dots on the top as well. So I'm going to take, that one's got the green dots. So I'm going to load my brush on the side. The dots are something that people usually hate it or they love it. It kind of helps diffuse the eye, and so you can just see more. And so I personally really like the dots. I think they're great. But if you like them, put them on. If you don't, don't. And I think there's a little bit too many dots near the face. So I'm just going to very carefully touch that area. And there's this one here feels too close. If there's any areas of dots you don't like, then I'm going to take my medium brush, and I think I'll sign with my dark green. Always test it here first. Make sure you like the amount of paint on your brush and the brush that you're using, and then holding it on the side. And there you go. So we got a step-by-step of the quail. From beginning to end. Let me know if you have any questions, and if you guys paint it and want to show me, I would love to see what you guys come up with. This is a really big jump from the other one I have on the website. This is an advanced one, and the other one's a beginner one, but I wanted to show you guys just a little taste of both. So I hope you guys enjoy painting the quail, and all the best.